welcome everyone to this Psychonautica panel, where once again I'm joined by a group of awesome folks from across the psychedelic community who'll be sharing their thoughts on tonight's topic, which is the Psychedelic Renaissance 2.0. Where do we go from here? And just to expand on that, the term psychedelic renaissance is used to describe the renewed interest in psychedelics in the late 90s and early 2000s, starting as the underground subculture before moving into academic research. And because of that, we've seen a fairly drastic shift in legality and public perception, meaning it's no longer taboo for people like us to discuss these experiences fairly openly here on the internet, or even openly consume certain substances depending on where you live. Now, during this renaissance, we've seen psychedelics evolve from being something that was counterculture into something that's more accepted by the mainstream. And as with many things that find a wider audience, branches and forks start to appear in that path. And so we now have psychedelics offered as medical therapy, clinical research being done on them, new novel ways of combining subjective experience with modern technology like intravenous delivery systems and optical lasers. And this is already what's happening today, which offers a question. What is going to happen tomorrow? Is what's happening today good or bad? Are we drifting too far from the traditional roots of these substances and losing some wisdom in the process? Or are psychedelics and consciousness simply a form of technology that we should develop as we would any other? So that's the topic for tonight. And to help unpack, I have this truly outstanding collection of people from all corners of the psychedelic community who I will just very briefly introduce. First up, we have Josie Kins. Josie is the creator of various websites and online communities relating to psychedelic subjective effects. And a couple of years ago, she made the leap into being a professional researcher for Mindstate Labs, and she still finds time to make awesome videos here on YouTube. Also, we have Emily Tremolo-Kins, who is Josie's partner in crime, assisting the research and production of the Josie Kins channel, and also running her own YouTube channel. We've got a new face to the panel, is Valentina Manini, who is a professional psychedelic facilitator here in Switzerland, specializing in ketamine infusions within a therapeutic setting, and is also certified in internal family systems, which she uses within her therapeutic practice. Next, we've got another first-timer here on the panel, but certainly a familiar face for anyone who watches my channel. We've got Dan Goler from the YouTube channel Dan Go Thoughts, who is the man behind the DMT laser simulation theory, which is something we discussed a few times on previous panels and which I've discussed on my own channel. And then finally, we've got two series regulars here who probably need no introduction. My brother Psychetubers, Vivec and Gabe Hardie, both awesome content creators, and it's great to have them back on here again. So it's an absolute pleasure to have all you guys here. I'm really looking forward to what you have to say on this topic. I'm going to put links in the description below to everyone's channels or social media. So to you, the audience, if you like what you hear from these guys, please go and check out their content. And if you enjoy these panel conversations and want to support this channel, please click like and subscribe because it really helps the algorithm. And if you want to consider becoming a patron or making a donation, that is very much appreciated. And again, the links for all that will be below. So, all that blurb out the way, let's start the conversation off with just a feel for where everyone's at in terms of this. Like what I see is a bit of a collision between kind of like the new technology compared with like the classic use of psychedelics. And that technology, I say, could be anything from, what's been referred to as DMT-X, this intravenous pumps, to something like a designer drug that only gives you access to certain parts of the psychedelic experience, or any other example that you want to comment on. So let's just go around the table. Just tell us what your thoughts are on these kind of things, and just throw anything else into the mix that you want to. And let's start the ball rolling with Josie.
Yeah, sure. So I think the cultural and legal situation with psychedelics is objectively improving. That's not to say that things are perfect and there aren't going to be trade-offs, but it's a hell of a lot better than the situation of just extreme criminalization and social taboo. I do lean slightly more towards seeing psychedelics as a technology that we can refine and develop and apply, but I do think there is also benefit in traditional cultural practices, and I think the Western world is probably going to have to kind of reinvent that as time goes on over the next couple of decades.
Okay. So I'll move. I'm not sure if everyone's got the same view as me, but I'll move left to Emily.
Okay. Yeah. So for me, coming into the space in the way that I have, I am very aware of all the different, or of several different attitudes that need to be kind of managed as we move into a space of more acceptance of psychedelics and more use of psychedelics. And it's kind of hard to just sum things up in a little brief blurb here, but I think that there's going to have to be a kind of reckoning that different people will approach these things differently and get different kinds of things out of them. And there are huge business interests in all of this. There's huge wellness interests, spiritual interests. And I think it's going to go a lot of different directions all at once. I don't think there's going to be a unified psychedelic movement where everything is doing the same thing in any way.
Okay. Valentina, what do you want to offer your thoughts?
Well, a quote comes to mind that is, "The way to hell is paved with a lot of good intentions." So that would be my main concern in a way. I see a lot of people with a lot of very good intentions, and yet not really understanding what they are talking about or what they're trying to do. I also see a lot of people who are taking advantage to, of course, make money. We do live in the society of capitalism and profit. And at the same time, there's just the wish that we would go towards reconnecting to our humanity rather than getting even more distant from it, as it has been happening in the past.
Okay. Let's go jump up to Gabe. Where you at, brother?
Yeah. I think that for me, like the original sort of psychedelic renaissance was what kind of like you alluded to, that merging of these. To me, like the psychedelic experience, especially something like psilocybin or DMT, feels very archaic and like something we've probably been experiencing for a long time. And I think the original psychedelic renaissance was the merging of that thing with like our modern Western sort of science and technology, and the whole like psychedelic renaissance 2.0 question really kind of like, it's hard for me to wrap my mind around, because like we're experiencing such a rapid increase, this almost like exponential curve of, advancement in technologies and our understanding of the world around us. And I do think that psychedelic drugs are going to merge with that in probably a sort of extreme way, but I don't know exactly like what that is going to look like right now. But yeah, and that thing there that Valentina said, I appreciated that, because that's something that I've noticed and I've brought up before in previous podcasts, is that there does seem to be this sort of like weird industry, forming around psychedelics. And you see it, at least my algorithm on social media is constantly pushing out, gurus and these expensive retreats. And not that that is like a blanket bad thing. I don't think that that's the case, but like Valentina alluded to, I think that there is probably some questionable people involved in this. And it's like, how do we weed out the good from the bad? So yeah, and I could talk all day, but I'll send it back to Vivec or Dan.
I think it's probably just like Instagram just clocked me, mate, on some of your pictures. Like the guy in the bandana thought, this is the target audience for all the guru advertisers.
Zuck's after you, lad.
Yeah. Go on, Vivec. Let's hear your take, mate.
Go on then. I think the thing that's most fascinating for me, especially considering my background, is you're starting to see the layman get involved. You're starting to see everybody get involved now, rather than there being, obviously, forces want to have a monopoly on this growing renaissance. But say back in the day, before it must be said that the advent of the internet has been an integral part to spreading this awareness. And just say like what I deal in with the trip reports, very basic people, goes and gets a few mushrooms off a dealer, and then he has these profound experiences, and now he has the ability to share it with the world. Whereas back in the day, it would be word of mouth, and obviously the word of mouth spreads very fast. But like you said, Gabe, it's exponential now, isn't it? Everyone's got the fingers in the pie, and with that also comes a lot of hurdles that we need to overcome. Like you said, Valentina, the road to hell's paved with good intentions, and that even though it's great, everyone's getting involved, and I think that's a great thing. We also have to be wary that there are so many different forces that have different agendas regarding this whole sphere. And to anyone listening, get involved in your own way. That's one thing I was going to say later on in the end, but I think it's really important. Like, I'm just some regular dude from Lancashire who just stumbled upon this, and you can do it as well. Literally just start doing it in any single way. Get on YouTube, make music, do film or whatever, and try and be a counteractive force to the sort of egoic, self-serving forces out there. Like what you said, Gabe, there's all these big pharma type characters that want to get their greasy hands on it. And basically, the more conscious people need to come together in this space and ensure that even though there are going to be hurdles, that we overcome them in a wise way and don't backslide back into the Ronald Reagan, Nixon era of the war on drugs, basically.
Vivec for president, mate. That was that.
I'm taking over.
One Vivec is running for president, so.
Oh shit! Yeah.
All right, yeah.
I tell you what, the amount of people who come in my comments and say, "Is this the same Vivec running for president?" I'm like, "Yes, it is, 100%."
Yes, it absolutely is. Yeah.
I'm his shadow self.
It's his side hustle.
Yeah.
Danny, do you want to come in, mate?
Sure. Well, first of all, thank you for having me on, Rob, and hello everyone.
Pleasure, dude.
Yeah, I very much second the sentiment that some of you expressed. Started with what Valentina said originally, which is that we got to be very careful with how we adopt this thing, especially because so many people have access to it, just like Vivec and Gabriel said, and I'm pretty sure that you guys voiced the same. I really like the way that Alex Boehner outlined it in the bigger picture, which is that we have to adopt kind of the ways that psychedelics teach us or can teach us, the whole inclusiveness thing. And instead of being building models based on our old models, so, pure capitalism, and then how do we make the biggest buck, and people writing, like trying to patent absurd things, like, when we held his shoulder, that's a patent because it's like this ridiculous money grab. But at the same time, just to try and keep like the balance in my own mind, the road to hell is paved with good intentions, but it's mostly paved with bad intentions. So having good intentions is not a bad thing. It's just that we got to be humble that maybe we're missing something. And the way that I see it as, I don't know what you were alluding to, Vivec, when you said giving your background. Did you mean like in psychedelics or?
Just in general with my life, just being some very, very average sort of person, and then that stumbled upon this sort of YouTube success in a sense, and starting to, because I do like to maintain this level of groundedness and very down to earth guy, but I also have to be honest with myself that I am influencing people's perception of this whole sphere in a sense, and I do take that very, very seriously in the way that I talk and present myself. And like you say, you can have the best intentions in the world, but you can easily get lost within that and think you're fighting for the forces of good. But yeah, when you get to say, I guess the reach that I have, if someone else gets in that sort of area, that if they're not clued up, they're not wise, not conscious. It's not saying I'm the wisest, most conscious person ever, but I do take it very seriously. And some characters, especially in YouTube, don't take it very seriously and don't realize how much of an influence they're having on people's perceptions regarding all this. So yeah, it's just about consciousness and being aware, isn't it, really?
I think that's probably true of a lot of the people who come into this sphere. I think we tend to have this kind of like preconception that people are coming in with some sort of very solid ethical framework in place, and particularly when we're talking about people who are dealing with like designing drugs or designing sort of the software that affects society and things like that. And often it's not, people are just people like us who just somehow end up in some position where somebody's listening to them, or they have a certain job or a certain responsibility. And I don't think there's many people who've had, that sort of chance to have a very solid, like grounding. We work this stuff out on the fly. But I think it's really good that you're aware of that, Vivec, and that you sort of you do ground yourself in that.
It's easy to lose yourself, especially the YouTube ego of all these really big people. I mean, you look at it in anyone who gets a bit successful and starts to have an influence, there is going to be an element of ego creeping up, and you will start to have this elevated sense of importance. But it's important to remember where you came from, and also remember who's listening to you and how they look up to you and how they perceive you. Like, I've had a lot of people sort of idol worshipping me in a sense, which for me is even worse than when I get troll comments telling me I'm the Antichrist. Because if someone's idol worship worshipping, they're taking your opinion as biblical fact. And sometimes I just have to put my foot down and say that, look, right, there's no real distinction between me and you. You can do this if you want. Just literally just keep your head in gear and be as conscious as possible.
It is one of the best parts of being a YouTuber, though, is it just to be able to get some of the comments that you get, and just I mean, just for the benefit of the audience, we do share a lot of the comments that we receive, and we get some absolutely batshit ones.
Yeah, Josie, just take the cake sometimes.
I think I just want the craziest comments, to be honest.
Yeah, Danny, do you want to come in, mate?
Yeah, I just wanted to tie that point down in one sentence. The reason I asked you is because I wasn't sure what you were referring to, but I do meet psychonauts, or like very seasoned people who they spent, like, they are veterans, like they've done it for like 30-40 years, and sometimes I see comments by them about kind of like they talk about the fact that what you guys mentioned about the fact that now everybody are talking about psychedelics, they all of a sudden discovered it and they feel they have something of value to say, and there's like a very almost like a negative, like, who are you, like you don't even know anything kind of thing. And I'm looking at them to go, well, no, like this is a great opportunity for you as the veteran to kind of impart your actual wisdom now. That's your time to shine, to help the kids who don't know anything, to actually kind of, to pave the way in a way that is constructive for the next generation. In every generation, you're always going to have the idiots and the geniuses that come out of that generation. And maybe some kids who just started dabbling in it like 2 years ago will understand things you never did. And I always look like, I see the dynamic of like the experience that people have when it comes to like knowing what psychedelics are to a large degree because of experience. And they have an opportunity now because, the fact that it's more acceptable will automatically means there's more people using it and more opinions in that space. And so I guess humility and compassion would be the two things that I would try and lead into that space.
Yeah, just one thing on the point with the idiots and geniuses. I think one thing with that has to be factored into the psychedelic conversation. Certainly, I've seen some of this and I've done videos on this topic. Is you can have people who are very high level intelligence in across the spectrum, but then with psychedelics can fundamentally change something about your belief system, so you can believe in something completely batshit and still communicate that in extremely. I'm not singling you out here, Danny. You
could loop me in as well. To be fair,
like if we talk about like typical guru type people, that you get some people.
Well, this Mckenna syndrome.
Exactly. Yeah, we can sort of circle back around.
Very
to
consistent.
Yeah.
So
go ahead. Of course, please.
In terms of like what we were talking about like all these new people getting involved with psychedelics, and it's a renaissance. One thing that sort of like makes me fishy a bit is the sensationalism with like the media and all of that. Not because I don't believe in the like efficacy of psychedelics, I totally do, and I make that very clear in a bunch of different ways, and I try to be as like honest as possible and stuff like that. But I do sometimes wonder if there's like this game of like smoke and mirrors being played in a way. Because like I think that psychedelics hold like this massive potential for people when it comes to like healing and potential mental health benefits and things like that. I think that they're an extremely useful catalyst for that. But at the same time, I think that a lot of people's like problems and suffering do stem from a sort of like deep systemic issue as well. Like Vivec, before we got on here, you said something about like, the cost of living crisis where you're at and stuff like that.
That's why I can't afford a webcam.
I'm super happy that we're like making progress in this sphere and things are becoming less taboo and they're becoming, decriminalized and all of that. But I wonder sometimes if it's like a bit of a carrot on a stick, like, like, hey, we're giving you this thing, and I don't know if Valentina. Yeah.
Yeah, like completely agree. Like two of the biggest problems that I see, one is humbleness that Danny mentioned, and the other one is the problem with responsibility. We're still in a medical system that does take away the responsibility from people and still pursues this notion that they need to be treated, that they're sick and they need to be treated, and therefore I'm giving you a pill. And now pills, of course, are any kind and antidepressants, so very big, Ritalin, probably a close second, I don't know. the stats, but next comes the psychedelic in the pill. But the structure of the medical system is not changing. So I'm still giving you a pill because you need to be treated, and you cannot be trusted in your own healing. Right? You need to give that authority to someone who has studied, who's knowledgeable, who knows about this. And so, like, the system is still the same, right? I'm not giving you trust, and I'm not giving you responsibility. I know I am the authority, and I know all the answers. And
No, I agree with everything you just said, and I'll add on there. I think that the sort of like attitude that, at least, I live in the United States. I think the attitude that we have towards drugs in general is similar in terms of like it is this complete passing off of responsibility. And what I'm about to say, okay, I'm just gonna say it. Like, like when I see some news sometimes about like, somebody say overdosing or whatever it is, and that is tragic. I'm not downplaying that. That is very tragic. But at the same time, like, there's this passing off of responsibility of like, oh, the cartels and the drug dealer and like this person. And it's also, but I do think we need that fundamental level of like education and responsibility for our own actions and to hold ourselves accountable. And I think that there's this shadow that has been casted all over all of it in a way, like there's so much misinformation jammed into your head growing up about it, and then when you get to the age where you might want to experience or you come across these things, a lot of people do have to just figure it out for themselves.
Emily, did you want to come in?
Yeah, there's some things like this. There's been other things talked about, but I guess going back to something that Danny was saying with people who have a lot of experience personally with psychedelics, and then trying to come in telling people what they are and what they aren't. And then the medical field using psychedelics with this kind of attempting to have this kind of authority of this is what it is, this is what it does. But the psychedelic experience is far more individual than most medicines seem to be. And the set and setting can really drastically influence how someone's experience is, how recreational it is, how therapeutic it is, and just different people's metabolisms of these substances seems to really alter how euphoric it might be, how introspective it might be, how much clarity they might be getting, how much they're likely to slip into some delusions. All of that kind of thing is much more individual than we're used to being able to study. And using some of the older methods for studying medications and trying to apply that to psychedelics is really kind of showing how these results coming from these laboratories is a lot different than people's experience of these substances. And it's something that is very much a work in progress that is affecting both people trying to give their information from being a veteran and then also the medical field. And the medical field trying to treat it like a medicine in a typical take a pill kind of way when it's just not like that.
Yeah. Well, I want to circle back around to something that Gabe said earlier, and also something that we were talking about just before we started recording. Because Gabe, when we kind of went around the table, you mentioned around this archaic human. In fact, that's the very sort of anarchism I was talking about. So yeah, you're talking about this kind of no worries, mate. You're talking about this archaic human experience, which I think is something we can all recognize. This feeling of an experience, kind of without the guardrails on, and the benefit that comes from having that kind of experience. But then when we look at a lot of this, psychedelic Renaissance 2.0 stuff, it's almost the opposite of that. And in particular, Gabe, we were talking about ketamine itself as a substance and how that feels different to something, say, like psilocybin or DMT we're taking as like ayahuasca. This and I think the wording that we were talking about, like, there's almost a slightly there is like a modern feel to it. It feels like it doesn't necessarily have this same kind of archaic, deep rooted, I don't know, like humanness to it. It's got this kind of almost like alien, modern. Yeah, it does feel kind of clinical. So go ahead, Josie.
You're saying that ketamine doesn't feel archaic or natural, I suppose?
I
It's just got a different flavour to it, though, hasn't it? Like,
I don't know if I'd go as far as say. Yeah, go on, Gabe.
It has like a 21st. It has like, and this is anecdotal. This is like subjective to me, but ketamine definitely does have a sort of like 21st century, like, you know. And I know this gets to woo woo shit right here, but spirit to it. It has that 21st century spirit to it.
Well, this is one of the things.
There are a lot of psychedelics that feel synthetic as well, though. So it's not a dissociative specific thing.
So something interesting though about. Oh, go on.
Go ahead.
Yeah. I was just going to say, bloody hell, if you ask anyone about ketamine, fucking hell, ask me. I'm literally addicted to the stuff or in recovery from it. But interestingly, being from the UK, there is this phenomenon, as many of you know, that, I mean, if you watch any Vice videos, and if you live over here, ketamine has sort of become the hallucinogen and just recreational drug of choice for young people over here. And there is a certain flavour to it, a certain aspect to it that psychedelics don't have. Obviously they're very similar, but something about young people gravitate towards ketamine and its dissociating qualities, especially in this fucking information overload world, and we're all just like bombarded with stuff. Something about ketamine, people are drawn to it in a different way, I'd say, nowadays than when in the past. Obviously ketamine has existed for a very long time, but something about in this modern world where we're bombarded with so much stuff, information overload, and young people especially wanting to like detract themselves from that and losing themselves in it. So obviously ketamine can be extremely great therapeutically, exploring altered states of consciousness, but speaking as a literal ketamine addict and knowing lots and lots of other people around my age and just this sort of area that I live in, the rave scene and that, this is a good example of people losing themselves within what is actually a really powerful tool for healing. And
would you say though, mate, would you say that my experience of it is that people aren't seeking that same kind of archaic experience from ketamine? It is being used very much recreationally.
Yeah, I agree.
And it's not being used in the same way to kind of like throw yourself into like where somebody would go on like an ayahuasca or a mescaline retreat. It's where it's, I don't know. I don't get that same ancestral feeling to it. But I can see a few hands raised. So let's go with Valentina first. I think you had your hands up.
About ketamine, I mean, I do feel that people just find what they need. Of course, what they need is connection and belonging and connection to the self. But given that they're not finding that and they don't have a way to access that, ketamine is both dissociative and it lowers anxiety big time. So it makes a lot of sense that the new generation found ketamine as being very effective to actually being able to have social interactions with each other. It takes down social anxiety. It also dissociates in a way that you don't feel your body very much, and especially if your body is holding a lot of pain, that is a lot of relief. So in a way, I do understand why ketamine can become very addictive and is used in that way. And at the same time, when used in a therapeutical context, it actually does the exact opposite. As the people who are in a therapeutical context, they do want to find that belonging, that inner connection. What it does is that relaxes the default mode network of the brain. It relaxes those parts that are usually very active and managing everything. So they relax, of course, rumination, thinking, worrying, analyzing, and those kind of parts of the psyche, so that the person can actually access that energy and can then go deeper into wounds, into trauma, into whatever is keeping the system in a disconnected place. So once again, set and setting makes all the difference in the world. While in the end, the human behind it still needs the same basic things, which is belonging and inner connection, love.
I think. So go ahead, Dan.
So I just wanted to say that this is actually one of these things where some of what Darren said was extremely helpful to kind of put things in the bins that they maybe belong. And I don't remember if he was quoting somebody, but he was. I think when he was talking to Shulgin, I actually think there's this famous interview. They're walking in the cemetery, and he was saying that ketamine kind of feels like a sterile hospital that was just built, and it's completely clean, completely sterile, but there's not much more there. It's completely neutral. It's kind of like a neutralizer, and it does feel like it almost like brings you back to like 8-bit. And like I agree with you, Gabe, that it's like that ultimately we can only speak from our own experiences, but a big enough collective of subjective experiences become kind of like an objective truth about human experience, or a more objective, let's say. And I think that across the board, that's really what it does. And so I completely agree with you, Valentina. There's a component there. Like I think we can all agree that it definitely feels different than the archaic style of the content. But I there's something about that thought experiment, without even getting into the metaphysics of it, that because of the other substances had like time to interact with us, it's almost like they created content for us because they understand us. And then where ketamine was just made, so it doesn't know us yet, so it's just kind of like a blank slate, and slowly it will fill in with I don't know if that's true or not, but it does help me think of it in these terms, because ultimately it's what the person actually needs, what each tool does. And in the ketamine case, yeah, it just kind of like clears the slate from which you can then reassess things. To me, it always feels like it almost knocked down all the trees and you can just see the horizon. Like you don't have to worry about the next decision. You just kind of know what the next thing needs to be.
Yeah, it's very liberating, ketamine. For me personally, just going back to what we were saying about the archaic feeling of psychedelics, there's also an animistic quality to psychedelics. It gives you a sort of a feeling of everythingness and like an infinitude, and where obviously there is a quality of infinitude to ketamine, but also it has a lot of semblance to sort of like the Buddhist quality of sort of like no mind, no self. It's sort of like the contrast to psychedelics in a very similar sort of the deepest ketamine realms have this like level of nothingness to it, which used in conjunction with psychedelics can give you some seriously deep insights into what I would say is like the metaphysical nature of the universe, because they both, and like any psychedelic really, there's so many different ones, different research chemicals, and they all have different little flavors to them that give you little clues into what the mind is, what consciousness is, what reality is. And yeah, like you say, ketamine's just getting to know us and we're getting to know it. Who knows what the potential is there for it.
Yeah, I think, Josie, I don't know if you want to come in, but I just wanted to give you a little poke before you came in, because I remember you and I had a conversation a couple of years ago, and I was kind of prodding you about your thoughts on having a spiritual experience. And I think you mentioned at the time that the most spiritual experience you'd ever had was on ketamine. So I just wonder if whatever you're going to say, if you could just fold some, if I'm right, if I'm remembering that correctly, if you could just...
I don't think the most spiritual experience that I have ever had was on ketamine, but I can say that DXM consistently provides me with incredibly profound spiritual experiences. And I guess I just wanted to give a counterpoint to the whole ketamine not feeling archaic thing, because while I generally agree, I went on a ketamine retreat as a corporate team building exercise with my co-workers in the mountains of Colorado, and the psychotherapist that presented that included all sorts of ritual. We were out in nature, we were setting intentions, there was music, we were outside in a storm, and like, my god, that felt at least as archaic as any of my experiences with ayahuasca or DMT. So I do think it is really situation.
Josie, do you mean the ceremony, or do you mean the experience itself? Like the experience itself felt different?
The ceremony and the ritual altered the subjective effect profile of the ketamine to an extent that I initially underestimated, because I'm a no fun materialist or whatever. And it resulted in an experience that did feel more archaic and spiritual than it usually would otherwise, essentially.
Interesting.
Yeah, that was something I kind of wanted to add in about my own experiences with ketamine, is that while, I described that it does feel very different, it doesn't have the same necessary sort of like archaic feel that something like DMT would have. Like, I've had experiences on ketamine that have been like, and I don't even know what the right word is to use here, like spiritual or heart opening or whatever, as any other substance. And I think that sometimes we underappreciate the amount that our sort of like preconceptions of these things can, like the effect that can have on the experience. You know what I mean? Like what Danny was alluding to there about, like, we're sort of building up the the narrative of ketamine, and you think about something like DMT with Terrence McKenna talking about the machine elves, and then we have the whole machine elf phenomenology and a lot of people interacting with these things. Now maybe there actually is elves that are manipulating time and space for us, or maybe he did sort of like plant that into that like internet of consciousness or whatever. But I think that and that's why psychedelics are fascinating to me, because there's all these different facets that come into play, and I feel like there's layers to the experience.
Mm-hmm. I think one counterpoint I'd like to run, I'll come to you, Val, is I think an interesting one there which we can compare to ketamine is something like 5-MeO DMT. Now, although there's this kind of like cult of toad that's kind of popped up, where I think like people are making it like there's been some sort of long tradition of ancient Bufo usage. There's some fairly compelling evidence that that's kind of complete bullshit, and that really 5-MeO DMT is something that's really only kind of popped into usage within the last 50 years or so. And that doesn't have that feel. That does feel fully baked from the go. Even if you take synthetic 5-MeO DMT, you don't get that, or at least I don't, I should say, get that feeling of synthetic-ness, like this is something that where the content's not built up. It just feels like a complete experience, to the point where I don't even kind of have that kind of question around it, like we're talking about with ketamine. So I don't know. I just.
But the 5-MeO still comes from natural components, I guess, and ketamine is synthesized. So that I think maybe there's what the difference might be.
I propose that.
Yeah, let's let Valve come in.
Yeah.
Can I propose, I'm really curious how you feel about the distinction that I feel that there is. I have experience with all the substances. I feel that they all have their own personality in a way, and that the experiences that they can bring forward can be very different from person to person, but also in the same individual at different times. And they can be extremely spiritual, they can be sometimes superficial, they can be all kinds of the wide range, and they all can do the whole range. But what I feel is the difference is that there are substances that in a way facilitate the connection with the inner intelligence. And then there are substances that honestly feels like medicine, and you feel that you're connecting with an intelligence that is outside of you. And that's the main distinction that, at least personally, I find when I interact with ketamine. I don't have the feeling of an external intelligence when I interact with ayahuasca. Then it doesn't matter what belief system one can have. The experience is the experience, and the experience is that there is an outside and intelligence that is, I don't know. That's just my perception. That I'm really curious to hear what's your.
I was going to say it goes back to the subjective angle of it, where say you and say I'd say I'd not experienced say an entity contact experience on ketamine, but I've shared numerous trip reports and read many of them where people do have the complete inverse of that effect, where they say they'll experience entities in a vein to, I'd say, ayahuasca, or say a high dose shroom or LSD experience. And it just feels like, again, a lot of us are all wired up differently from a literal biological standpoint, and just our level of consciousness, ego, whatever you want to call it. People are gonna extract different qualities of this wide gamut of experience, and some people may just be completely restricted to just one type of experience through any chemical. Like you say, it has different personalities, but we also have different personalities, and that synergistic effect has a wide range of differences between all of us. So it really does just tie back into that subjective nature of taking any sort of substance.
Yeah. Emily, do you want to come in?
To kind of bring this back into the context of the overall discussion of the psychedelic renaissance, we're doing a lot of talking about if things feel more synthetic or more authentic or natural or anything. And for some people, because of course with the psychedelic renaissance, there are people who find psychedelics to seem very dangerous. For some people, it kind of being a say a mushroom that they're worried about having some level of being toxic or growing on unhygienic materials or whatever else could be an aspect of hesitation for them. For some people, something that is produced in a sterile environment in a lab seems safer and therefore like a more viable option for them to even consider. Whereas other people, something that's more from a lab might seem more dangerous and something natural might seem safer. But I guess what do you guys think is the reason why this idea of what feels synthetic is important to this discussion of the psychedelic renaissance?
Yeah, I'll take a stab at that. I think the angle I'm kind of going from here is that with a lot of this, what kind of Gabe describes like archaic human experience, there is this feeling of or this sense of community that comes around it. There's some sense of like linkage of, they can feel very ancestral. The actual setting sort of lends itself to being done in a very communal way, and the experience itself feels very human. Now, I don't want to get this into a sort of this drug better than this drug. I don't believe that's not where I'm going at all. What I'm kind of getting at is that as the Renaissance kind of moves forward, and are we sort of, it's kind of fairly acknowledged that there is a kind of a sense of a lack of community in, just the West in general. And our practices seem to be evolving more in that direction, where I would also, propose that there is a kind of that lack of archaic human experience within where we're going with these kind of, substances. So that's kind of where I think it's interesting in terms of the psychedelic renaissance 2.0, particularly when we're talking how that is the model. Then now that's now being baked into therapy, medicalization and stuff. It's like, are we? It just feels like the West is drifting further and further away from the human aspect to it and becoming much more kind of like focused on the inward thing, which is not necessarily a bad thing. And I'm but it is almost becoming exclusively, and it's like the substances are seeming to match the practices, are seeming to take away from that. And I just wonder, is this a good direction for the Renaissance, that we're kind of like we're basically putting ourselves in concrete rooms and saying, okay, we need the guardrails, we need the whale song, we need the mask, we need the doctors, I need this to be one-on-one. I don't need this, that I don't want the messiness and the puke bucket and the shit in the pants and maybe that, but it just seems to be, it's just taking us away from, and that's not to, idolize the traditional stuff as well. That's got its own, probably it's not for everyone and stuff like that. But it just seems, I'm just wondering, are we veering way too much down that road? So that's where I was kind of coming at, and I don't know if anyone wants to comment on that.
Comment on that. Yeah, in regards to, I guess, ritual and spiritual practice and, I don't know, shamanic techniques and things like that around psychedelics, I don't really feel like it should be the place of the medical system or the state to develop those kinds of things. And in places like Colorado, where we are, where most plant psychedelics are decriminalized and transitioning into being medicalized for mental health reasons, I think there's an opportunity for the community, people doing these things at home, to develop that kind of thing over time, and it will presumably take decades. And I don't think we can just copy paste traditional practices from other cultures. I think we are going to have to develop our own ones. Yep,
totally agree. Val, go ahead. And I don't know. I'll just give you a little poke. But I don't know if it's something where you're comfortable to talk about your own recent experience with some kind of modern shamanism. If you are, feel free to run. If not, we can gloss over it.
I can definitely do that. I just wanted to say that in the end, the problem is that indigenous cultures do have belonging in the tribe, in the community, and that's something that modern society and Western society basically managed to spin away generation after generation. And I feel that that's one of the things that, unless we find a way to bring that into our life, into our societies, then there's no psychedelic that can stay in a way that also about, of course, the wisdom of the psychedelics that show us what needs to be there and what needs to happen, but then somehow it also needs to happen at the societal level.
Do you mind if I comment on
Probably,
that? So I think
Go for it, Dom.
I think you're absolutely right, but I think if we zoom out, it really applies to many components, like different modalities that we can take that lead to this better life. One of them is nuclear family. Community is a big one, 100%. Different forms of mindfulness, just because they're kind of like the science of attention. And that's really where it lies, right? I see psychedelics and other substances that like psychedelic adjacent, whatever. They're like heavy hitters. They like give you one dose of like this big thing. And you're like, holy crap, like MDMA, like I've never felt love like that before, right? And you're like, oh, it's possible. The whole Sam Harris trajectory, but like he didn't know it was even possible that it sent him to do ashrams for 10 years. And ultimately, all of these good modalities, let's call them, just to make a caricature version of them, would have to be accompanying the process 100% because it's like going to the gym. Like, yeah, you can do the big dose and you can do the ayahuasca. When I did my ayahuasca ceremony, I met people that said that they come every week. And I'm like, what? Like, I think you're missing something. It's like there's it does the thing, but then it erects the walls for you to keep doing the work inside, between those walls. And I think that should never be glossed over. That should always be as the central point, which is the wisdom that we get. We have to implement daily because repetition is the only way, and you can't keep doing these things all the time. So I think, like, I 100% agree with you, Valentina, and I think this should be like, that point should be central to all of these practices, which is the maintenance, assimilation, and the processing of that information on a daily basis versus just like these one event kind of relying on these unique events for the wisdom.
Yeah, so I suppose the kind of the thing there is that with what we're kind of doing in the West, there isn't necessarily a practice baked into it. And I think this comes back to what Vivec was saying earlier about, the ketamine culture in the UK. It's a huge, we could call it like a psychedelic culture, but it is very much a sort of a recreational culture, and there isn't any sort of practice or anything like that around it. Now, I don't think that's necessarily a bad thing. The same thing was going on when I was a teenager. It was MDMA at the time. It's when the rave sort of culture was exploding. So those sort of, and I think we had similar thing in the 60s where everyone was popping acid, and some people were having very spiritual experiences, and some people were just getting absolutely smashed off the tits. So it's that happens all the time. It's good that people can sort of enjoy themselves, but I think it's
got to be a balance.
Yeah, it's got to be a balance, and also as the Renaissance moves forward and evolves, my sort of wonder and concern is that well, like, how can we bake in things, like how many people are aware of things like mindful practice and stuff like that? It's I would almost say that like people like us, the kind of the fringe of the mass of because like your average clubber in the UK is probably not doing mindful. I mean, I certainly wasn't at that age, and that sort of part of my life. So I just think we just need to keep that in mind. But let's I just want to pivot away from the sort of the discussing that sort of the ketamine thing, because I want to come to what you're famous for, Danny, which is a sort of another variation of this sort of a branch of the psychedelic renaissance, which is now moving into sort of the incorporation of technology into the experiences. And it's it's not unique here. We see similar things with like VR simulations of ayahuasca experiences. I mentioned it earlier, things like introducing technology in the form of the much hyped DMT-X of intravenous time controlled injections. And also I saw Andrew Gallimore posting something on Twitter about like some protocol for intraspinal LSD injections or something. So I just wonder, I mean, first of all, Danny, for anyone who's not familiar, do you want to just give a quick introduction to your sort of around what you do around the laser and where you kind of think that fits into this picture?
Sure. And just a quick thing to say, I mean, maybe framing this whole conversation, what I'm about to say, and also to you guys, because I saw you guys' discussion and mentioning of what I'm doing. So for me, it's not so much a technology question, this particular portion of it. It's the ontological discussion. That's it. The question is it real or is it just what we would call mind-made, right? And that's a big question. And that's where I see what I do operating in. That's the space. In a nutshell, essentially, I claim to have discovered a way that you and I had a lot of back and forth on, Rob, and we will definitely talk about it more now.
Very enjoyable back and forth at that, mate. It's been really great.
Same here. But essentially, if you project a diffracted laser on a wall, which is literally like the same laser you have in a supermarket that you scan the barcode, it just has to be wider. The diffraction really matters. So like what you did in your first video, like the laser pointer is not going to work. You seem to see across the board, everybody seems to see the same content. And yeah, we can discuss how we know it's the same content. But the claim is that there's an ontological observation there that is so concrete as to really raise the question of whether or not this space exists on its own side, even when we're not looking to a different level. That's the claim. Essentially, you see code running on surfaces. If you project a diffracted laser on the surface while you're on DMT, it also works on mushrooms. It also works on ayahuasca. These are the ones that we at least tested. Mushrooms and ayahuasca and DMT definitely feels like they're on the same channel if we're talking about the way that things feel. I have to, and this is obviously more of a question than a comment, but I'm going to say it in a matter of comment from my perspective. You guys talking about how mushrooms and DMT kind of feel archaic. Mushrooms, most of the time do. Sometimes they don't. Sometimes they feel much more technological. DMT, I don't remember, for me personally, once that it felt archaic. Like DMT to me feels like a completely alien world, or at least NN. And it feels completely technological, like super advanced. It doesn't fall even in the realm what I would call spiritual. Like what me personally, how I perceive the word spiritual. Now, I'm sure that if these extra dimensions actually exist, then a new linguistic tools have to be invented because we have to talk about them in terms of, no, this is real versus these are metaphors, or these are mind-made. And really the way that I see my project with the laser is around this ontological question and discussion, which is an open question and an open discussion. Like I always tell you, Rob, I have my convictions, but I'm not married to the proposition. I'm convinced, and I will voice why I'm convinced, but it is very much an open conversation, and I don't feel any part of me, of my ego, of my identity, tied to the truth claim of it. It's just that I'm presenting why I'm convinced and why other people are becoming convinced. But as I'm having this conversation, I'm also learning, like the last conversation you and I had, Rob, which was great, and we just recorded, but we never released it. I understood something from your perspective because you kept on mirroring it back to me. And essentially it's that the frame with which we speak of that actually plays a major role in how certain people perceive it. And because you always voice the concern of like, well, I always see like 20 years from now, the shrine of the laser, like people worshiping the laser. And I told you, well, not if I have something to say on the subject, because for me, it's a very much scientific like enterprise to do this. And again, I'm not the first one. I'll say this last part and then I'll leave it to you guys to comment or ask. But this is really the core of the discussion for me here. If this is real, can we, for a period, practice what it would feel like to just talk about it in these terms? Because it's a different discussion if you think this is mind-made entirely. And all I'm saying is, if we're entertaining the idea that it might be real, which, by the way, I'm obviously not the first one. And there's, I think DMT-X, a big portion of it is to kind of figure out the ontological question. It's not good enough to ask whether it can be mind-made because the brain is too incomplete. So the answer to that will be yes, and it will always be yes, because the incomplete machine can make anything. So that's not a good question from my perspective. A good question would be, can we ask about one demarcation line, which I don't know it, but it's another question. Can we have a decisive line or a more decisive line to say, is it what we call real, as in it's there when we're not looking, or is it not? And we're not in a place where we have that kind of demarcation line yet, and that's the thing I'm interested in.
Okay, Emily, do you want to come in?
Yeah, so I was looking up some things to do with some ideas on conducting psychedelic therapies in the whole like context of the psychedelic renaissance. And something that I saw an expert talk about, which I thought might be applicable to this kind of thing, is that when people are having those experiences and they're going really deep and they're starting to ask really big questions, according to this expert I was listening to, it's actually really important for the practitioner at that point to not be offering them any answers, to let them just think through it themselves and not try to guide them into a way of thinking about it. So I think it should be left up to people's individual experiences in this context of the psychedelic renaissance.
What specifically?
What their perception of things are, what their experiences of the world is.
But if we're asking that, if you're going about it to actually try and ask the ontological question, that's a separate project for me. So this is where I think the confusion a lot of times happen, at least from my perception. You correct me where you feel that you didn't misunderstand. So I think there's two separate things here. So there's the thing that Johns Hopkins is doing. I'm just using them as an example, obviously, which is much more the approach.
The DMT-X thing. Yeah.
No, the Johns Hopkins is not the DMT-X. Johns Hopkins, they're much more focused on therapy. So like how it helps you. Like I believe that most of the data about PTSD and MDMA came from Johns Hopkins. So their whole approach is the healing portion of it. Then there's the other question, which I'm claiming is a separate project, and we should separate them. There's the ontological scientific question, because I think there's enough on the table to postulate that it might actually be a real space. Or again, if you want to get a little bit more advanced, I would use a more Galamorian model where it's all world models, and then which one of them we want to dissect and say kind of exist in their own autonomy, their objective. But this is a separate project. So I fully agree with you that when you're coming at it from the perspective of trying to help people heal or come to a more balanced place and all of that stuff, I will be the last one to disagree with you. Absolutely 100%. You should let it to the person decide. I'm coming at it from a different perspective. Is it real or is it not real? And anybody who coming into the circle of doing that should be aware that we're not doing the therapeutic thing here. Like this is a separate thing, because you have to be able to ask the question. So here's a question that I just want you to kind of swirl around your head that lives with me. Let's pretend for a second that we all kind of buy that this is real. Just for a second. How would you go about determining that? What kind of how would we communicate to each other that this is a possibility, and how can we create tools that will help us determine that? And it's a separate project from healing. That's all I'm saying.
Hey, Danny.
Yeah, I understand.
And I'm sorry, guys, I had to switch over to my phone because y'all were lagging really bad. So I hope you can hear me and everything. Okay, let me know if you can't. But Danny, I want to ask you, man. Like, I admire, like Rob said, I admire your enthusiasm for this. But like beyond, I guess, proving that it's a real thing, which that's an interesting way of phrasing it to me, because it's like, well, what does that mean? But beyond proving that it's a real thing, is there something that you hope to like sort of pull from this experiment in terms of like, if we can prove it's a real thing, like what next?
That's a great question. What next is, this is the same question you would ask yourself with any cutting edge understanding of science. If it is the case, when quantum physics was discovered, it was not clear at all if it would ever be actionable on any technological level, because it was just like, it's nuts, right? But it was still pursued in the terms of like the ontological question. What is real? What can we determine that is real? I don't have a straightforward answer for you. I can, postulate all kinds of things. One of them would be, if it is in fact the case that this is an orthogonal dimension or the substrate we exist in, then I would assume, well, two things. One of them is that, a lot of people kind of email me and send me messages about warnings, like, be careful, that lady disappeared from the plane, all that. I'm like, to me, that's just a non-starter, because and this is where, again, because I understand that most of you probably, if not all of you, are not, this is not a possibility for you, or maybe a remote possibility. So it even sounds crazy to even talk about it in these terms. But yeah, if it is real, then whomever is simulating the space, then if they wanted to be completely undiscoverable, it would be. So the fact that it is discoverable tells you that this is just part of a continuation of understanding. And ultimately, I think if it's real, hey, what if you can actually create new tools with it that you never thought about before? What if you can change, the whole Donald Hoffman example of the desktop? Like, you're no longer going to be playing with folders. You're going to learn how to reprogram the shortcuts between the folders and where it sends you. And hopefully you're not going to mess up the URLs and the IP addresses too much. But you can actually bend the laws of physics, or you can understand a deeper understanding of what consciousness is and how it relates to what we call physical matter. If I have to be completely honest, I have no idea. This is kind of like the cutting edge of even deciding this. But I think that this conversation should be taken more seriously. And again, I hear like you guys voiced this a few times, and it will be fun to go toe to toe on this one. But because I happen to think that Terence was on a lot of things. Yeah, he was also confused about a lot of things. But in that sense, Terence used to say, this is what the issue I have with all the reishis and geishis and priests and all that. They don't emphasize that what they're talking about is real. And maybe they don't know it's real. But it is real, and for him it was very obvious.
Let's just park a second there, because I think Val wants to come in.
Go ahead.
Did you have your hand up earlier, Val?
Yeah, I wanted just a couple of things. One is just something that comes to my mind, that the thing with the laser, all the people seeing code running on objects and so on. It feels to me that there is one thing in common among these old people, is that they have a human brain, and they do believe still that the human brain is a pretty limited specimen in a very big universe of which we do not understand probably 99%. So it feels that there is already a bit of I don't know, it feels like a bias to me. That just because all these humans with their brains see codes when taking a psychedelic and looking at this laser in a certain angle, that does not necessarily mean that what they see, like that. I feel that there is a level of interpretation there. They see codes,
but all of
numbers,
it is
okay, but
reality is. Yeah.
Yeah,
materialism versus idealism again.
Absolutely.
I was literally going to say
but that's where it's at.
Let's get Jake on speed dial.
Yeah.
And on another level,
finish your thought, Valentina. Sorry, I cut you off.
Yeah, it's okay. And on another level, to me, it feels like the kind of need of having certainty about something, rather than surrendering to the reality that we really don't have so much certainty in this human life. And yeah, I'm going with it in a way. Like, I totally understand the need for certainty and wondering, is this real? Is this not real? Like, it goes into the bigger topic of, is there a point to all this? Is there a point in this life? Is there a point in this being on this planet, in this moment, in this reality? I totally get it, right? But yeah, I feel that in a way it's like the dog biting its own tail.
I'm gonna hop in right quick just so that I can respond to what you had told me previously after, like I said.
I'll try and remember and respond to all of them.
Yeah, so you said that you weren't sure if I had misunderstood you in terms of me talking about this psychedelic therapy aspect when it comes to this nature of reality type question. And where I was going with that is that I think that all of this kind of like epistemology isn't that relevant to the psychedelic Renaissance discussion. And I think that for us to try to conflate this idea of what is real, what is true, these spiritual beliefs, to conflate that with the psychedelic Renaissance won't do us and our movement any value.
What do you mean?
Well, let me try.
Wait 1 second. Why are you using the word spiritual with what is real, what is not real? I'm talking about it in terms of like concrete realness, or to the extent that we can talk about things that are concrete realness. That's what I mean.
There's just colloquial terminology, just this kind of nature of reality things in ways that we can't measure with instruments. A lot of people would consider that to be spiritual. That's all I was referencing there.
But all of it is based on... Go ahead.
Let's pack this one a sec, because I think Emily's right. I think we are kind of like veering off a little bit. But so let me try and tie what we're talking about here back to the whole psychedelic Renaissance 2.0 thing, because we touched on it earlier, that there is a sort of a quite famous earlier example of this, which is what Josie referred to as Mckenna syndrome, very, very famously of Terence McKenna doing possibly the earliest iteration of this kind of Renaissance 2.0. He's got a lot of sort of psychedelic ideas. He's starts using technology, funneling things off in a direction. And I would say the general consensus, and I'd be super interested to know where you go with this, Dan, because you mentioned you had some different ideas around it. But I think for most people, the whole time wave zero thing was what kind of emerged, and it felt like a bit of a kind of a misfire, a bit of a psychedelic misfire. So it was one of these things where it felt like, I'm sure to Terence, a very honest and curious interrogation of ideas that were popping up, and that this needed exploring, because hey, it's these are big ontological discussions, and what if this is correct, and what does it mean for mankind if we can plot out time? But it kind of, like I say, it became a misfire. So I think that's sort of way of, I'm certainly not saying that's exactly what's going on with you, Dan. And I think that there's, we've had some really good discussions on it. But I'm just saying that is a way that these ideas can veer off into something which actually doesn't really benefit the community. It doesn't benefit the movement, for want of a better word. And as I alluded to earlier, it does kind of pull us further away from what I think is like the heart of psychedelics, which is this, the human experience, the thing that can sort of really, bind us, give us a better understanding of ourselves. And I think that I do think there is a couple of misfires available on that landscape, whether this is one or other bits of technology are them or whatever. I have similar things around DMT-X, and everyone's getting very excited and hyped about DMT-X, and I'm like, I don't know. It's as an experiment, it's cool, but really, what's the benefit of going to some lab and strapping yourself into a gurney for 7 hours? And I don't know, that just feels like a not as valuable experience to me as something like a retreat. So I'll throw that out there if anyone's got any sort of comments on there. While Gabriel's cloning himself across
double game.
So I will just say, as Gabriel's cloning to multiple parallel realities, I'm going to try and say it again.
I was going to say, first my computer, internet wasn't working, so I switched to my phone, and then my phone literally overheated as I was sitting here. So I might be over by the freezer here in a minute, but yeah,
some dark forces are at play here.
So I'll try and be very brief, because I'm becoming aware that we spent the last, I don't know how many minutes basically talking about my stuff. So I'm just going to try and tie one answer to all of you, Valentina, Rob, and Emily. So I think that the core of this, and Josie was tongue-in-cheek saying, "Oh, we're going to idealism versus physicalism." That's where the core of this discussion is. So the point to me, to give you a quick idea of where the value is, it's kind of like the discussion of Mars versus why aren't we focusing on the stuff that we have to fix here on Earth first. I think that's a red herring. That's not a real conundrum. You're going to have people who are focusing on going to Mars, and you're going to have people who are focusing. It's not one or the other. And in fact, I think they're complementary. The things that we're going to learn by trying to go to Mars will definitely be applicable to what we can potentially do to help global warming, because we're trying to understand what it is like to terraform a planet or whatever. Understanding in general, knowledge, when it becomes more of universal flavor, always implies something about the whole picture. So I don't think, depending on what you call the community, I don't think the psychedelic community can be even, held in one container. A lot of people are just interested in different things. So I'm 100% with you. When you're talking about the therapeutic stuff, leave this aside. This is a completely separate conversation. I'm with you 100%. To you, Valentina, and I'm now noticing that this is being echoed back to me multiple times by Rob, and I hear it from you, Emily, and now Valentina voiced it again, which is that why are we focusing on these things? What is hidden behind this rhetoric is that we already know that it's mind-made. I'm saying that's the proposition that is being challenged. So what is the value ultimately? I don't know, but if it's true, we want to know it. So that would be my simple answer. I'm not going to pretend that I have some grandiose plan towards it. But my contention is that after you try it, and Rob, you did, and we can have a whole podcast about it. But I'll leave it there. I think the core of it is, why not? And then it doesn't subtract anything from any other endeavor that we're doing in the psychedelic space.
Go, Josie.
Yeah, I like agree with what you're saying, that pursuing these things is interesting and potentially useful, but I just think that in the conversation of this process of psychedelics being legalized and integrated into society, and how the medical system is going to work, and how capitalism and corporations and stuff are coming into it, I have all sorts of comments on what you're saying, and it is an interesting topic. I just think that like the epistemological stuff of whether or not the DMT space is a real thing outside of the human brain is a different topic, is one that interests me greatly, but it's a different topic than how we're going to integrate psychedelics into society.
I agree.
Like,
I would just say,
Can I say something?
But just one thing that is related to this, I want to about the misfirings, Rob. I want to remind everybody that the 60s showed us the biggest misfire of use. It had nothing to do with technology. It's just when people misappropriate something. So you definitely have that example, no matter where humans are involved.
Yeah, and whenever earlier, Danny, whenever I said that, I appreciate your enthusiasm, like I meant that. There's a certain level of respect that I have for what you're doing, and I think that one of the highest levels of respect that you can give something is a certain like level of skepticism at the same time, and I feel like that's what you're sort of experiencing here.
Oh,
and it's like to me, brother, like I think what you need to realize, and I think you do realize this, but like you're addressing the elephant in the room. I think anytime that anyone does something like DMT, what you're doing right now is you're addressing the elephant in the room of like that bigger question, And I think it was Terence McKenna who said something like, since we've brought up Terence McKenna multiple times, he said something like, if you were the creator or God or whatever, and you wanted to leave, and you made this game where there was this sort of like amnesic effect of your true nature, and you wanted to leave people with a little Easter egg, a reminder of what that is, what better messenger than a chemical messenger? And so like what you're doing, man, like what you're talking about, like wars have been fought over this for thousands of years. And like it's, there's a lot of tension behind it, but I respect it because of that fact. I do think that this is like worthwhile to look at. Of course, it's extremely complicated, and I do think people can lose themselves to delusion, but for whatever reason, a large amount of people who smoke fucking DMT seem to think that they're interacting with God, and I don't think we should just always dismiss that.
Well, let's.
Can I just say one thing? Can I just say one thing?
Oh, yeah, go ahead, Vivec.
I was just gonna take it back to just technology in a sense, because at first you mentioned the VR simulations and brain taps, and I think what's really important about these is that. Just personally, people that I know who've gone to use these things who are interested in psychedelics, but there's an element of fear. I think what's really interesting about them is that they give you a very, very, very simplistic, basic slice of what you might experience in a psychedelic trip. And I think that using these, I go to this place called Reset, where I live, and it's sort of a mindfulness facility. It's got sensory deprivation, ice baths, and it's just recently introduced the brain tap, sort of basically like just a VR fractal 360 experience. And although it's not got the profound sort of elevated levels of consciousness that you would experience in psychedelics, I think it's important for people who are interested in this stuff, who are a bit wary, a bit fearful, and don't know what they're getting into. I think that utilizing that in conjunction with, say, personal psychedelic practice, I think that's really good for people who are a bit scared about what might happen, and just easing people into that, into these profound levels of consciousness in these really basic, simplistic ways are actually having a really profound effect. Just little baby steps towards people just dipping the toes into their deep end, and that's just what I wanted to say regarding technology.
I actually have a question for the panel before you go, because I don't want to forget it. It's really important, and it's definitely related, Emily, I promise. Are you guys? No, it wasn't like tongue in cheek. I mean it sincerely. What is? Do you guys know if the whole thing with the God helmet and everything? Do you guys know if there's anybody who figured out any way to reproduce even a portion of like psychedelic experience using something like this, like magnetic resonance or anything like that?
I've heard that it hasn't been fully reproducible even within different studies. So I'm a little skeptical.
The God helmet in general?
God helmet.
Or?
Yeah, the
Really?
God helmet where they put magnets against the brain to induce a spiritual... I haven't looked into this too deeply, but I've heard it has not been reproducible in other studies for people that have access to the technology, let alone try to build one at home.
How are we defining right now the psychedelic experience? How are we defining it?
Even like anything that is even remotely resembling for, things like psilocybin experience or anything like that. I literally know nothing about it, and I realized that why wouldn't they do that if that was possible? But you're saying, Josie,
like
that it wasn't even
or the
type of experience, the way it feels, the content. Yeah, it was Persinger, right? It was his PhD student or something. But that was a while back. That's why I was wondering.
Yeah, I'd heard rumblings about it, but I'm not super familiar with it. But I'm guessing. I think I first heard of it like years and years ago, and the fact that there's not been much talk of it would suggest it's probably not as effective as maybe the initial hype was. But I just wonder if we can pivot across on some other kind of modern phenomena that's been tied into the psychedelic renaissance. I mean, I think one of them, or certainly future iterations of it, and one of them is microdosing. So this is again something that's come from its roots of very much in like the traditional sort of vein, but then has been kind of tech broed into this kind of like almost like a brain supplement, like some sort of like Joe Rogan-esque, like pop a few of these. So I'll put the question to Emily because she brought the question to the table. So like sort of micro, where do you think that fits into this picture?
It's definitely a really prominent thing in the psychedelic space right now, both in the very commercial thing where you have a bunch of products being released where it's like this, maybe a combination of different mushrooms, including psilocybin, that you can just buy as this commercial product. And then there's studies on it. The studies that we do see on microdosing seem to often use very different protocols than the community around microdosing is necessarily doing, which is interesting. And I find their psychometrics that they're using to study it kind of suspect. One thing that I found very interesting relative to, especially here in Colorado, where plants and fungi psychedelics are decriminalized, is that there is at least one movement of housewives, like moms in Denver, who have started microdosing psilocybin mushrooms to kind of help themselves with the kind of overwhelm of modern life. And they have a community around themselves where they like discuss it and give each other tips for it. So it seems to be a really big one where a lot of people who are hearing that psychedelics are good for you, that there's this benefit in using them, but are afraid to do the full psychedelic trip. And they find microdosing to be a much more viable thing for them to at least initially start out with.
Can I just ask something? Obviously, this is going to be a very personal, object thing, but I'll put my case. I don't particularly rate microdosing at all. I think it's kind of slightly novel interest, but I think it is way overhyped in terms of the sort of stuff that's been promised. And I work in the sector of where this is supposed to have the most benefit of IT, and I did a lot of experiments with microdosing, and I had some very, very strange intimate moments with an Excel sheet. It was so I just find that balance. But as just for you guys,
we've all been
just please offer your own sort of experiences on microdosing, and where just hype or yay or nay.
So you can go, Gabriel, if you want.
Oh, thank you, Josie. I've been struggling this episode.
The struggle.
Yeah, no, with the microdosing thing, I actually made a post this morning about this on Instagram, and I think that there's a lot more sort of like research and stuff that needs to be done. But one thing I think about a lot with like psychedelic experiences in general, but especially microdosing, is the sort of like effect that the placebo effect and how much that is involved with this, because the whole sort of like notion of microdosing is subperceptual, and there's all these different claims about what it'll do. And once again, it's sort of being touted as this like magical cure-all bullet. If we go back in time, not too far, they said the same thing about SSRIs. It was going to cure all your problems. And with, I think, the sort of phenomenon that's going on with microdosing, and maybe there is some very slight physiological effects happening, and I think that you can get some special synergies and alchemization by adding lion's mane, like Emily was describing, these different functional mushrooms and things like that. But I think that most of microdosing is placebo, and or what people are doing is they're actually going up to more of like a mini dose, because a lot of the protocols, what they call for is they tell you to keep increasing. They'll tell you to start really small and increasing it to where you like it. And if you ask me, most people are going to increase it to the point where they start to feel at least a little bit of something, and once again, it's one of these things where, like, I think any sort of modality that you use to, like, with the intention of bettering yourself and all of that is completely valid, and it does seem to work for a lot of people. But also, like, damn, sugar pills work for people too when they're given in the right context of the placebo and stuff. So I'm not really like too bought in to the whole microdosing thing yet, I guess I should say.
I just wanted to say I was gonna add on to that because, Gabe, I saw your post about it and thought it was very interesting because personally I've been experimenting with microdosing lately, and I literally agree with you so much that I had like different dosages of like what would you say would like a subperceptual dose, and then one that just slightly went over the barrier into a perceptual dose, and the difference was night and day. The perceptual dose had the actual noticeable effect on my consciousness and all of the great benefits that are purported from microdosing. And I also spaced it out, and say you were talking about how you need to space it out in terms of days, like 5 to 14 days to let your body rewire and allow yourself to get the most out of the experience. And the subperceptual doses was just literally just placebo of me sort of convincing myself that, I'm taking this thing that's supposed to improve my anxiety and all these other things that microdosing are great for. And actually, it was more or less my own mind at play than a chemical catalyst. So that was a great post that you made.
Thanks, man. The whole like tolerance part is where I kind of like lose it too, because it's like, just physiologically speaking, if you were, and I've met people like this, and I've had people reach out to me like this. I take 0.25 grams of psilocybin mushrooms every day, and it's worked wonders. And it's like, man, after like the second or third day, like this really shouldn't be exerting any effect. So like this is somewhat proof, I think, of what I'm saying, that and not that I think placebo is all of it. I'm open to being wrong about this, but I do think that a large amount of it is placebo, and there's so many different ways that your mind has control over your body. And when you think about something with like psychedelics and the psychedelic renaissance, there's so much hype and this like push behind it, and there's this feeling with it too. When somebody tells you like, this thing was illegal, but it's a mushroom, like how dare they take this plant from us, but it heals you. There's all this rhetoric and these preconceived notions to it. If I were to go somebody and tell them to start microdosing LSD and told them that like I prayed over this LSD and I made it with like love, I think that that's going to come out in the experience. Whereas if like I were to be like, hey, like I made this LSD in a fucking toilet when I was angry when I did it, like, I think that might come through in the experience as well.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah.
I just think with a lot with the microdose thing, I think it and this is another subject I'd like to get into later on. Around this kind of like designer drugs and like being able to take a psych and chop off bits of the experience. And I feel this is something of what's coming from the microdose, and it feels to, it just feels to me like people are trying to get the superpower without actually having the archaic no guardrails experience. And I mean, from my own experience, I just don't buy it. I don't think it does what people do, and I think it's just wishful thinking that it does make you a better programmer or a better. And that's not to say that it can't have some sort of benefit as for what it is, as a psychedelic. And I think that comes to like Vivec's point. When you do get the amount and you hit the sort of bit where you notice it, and it's like, I'm having a mild trip now, and I think that's a completely different thing to the kind of the bullshit promise of microdosing, which is this, hey, take this barely noticeable amount every day or whatever the protocol is, and you're just going to be, programming JavaScript like a champion or something.
Just have some modafinil.
Yeah.
But question for Emily, Josie, and Valentina: is there actual data on this? Like, were there studies conducted on microdosing?
I think Emily can comment on that. She's been looking into it.
I have a lot more to look into. But one thing I wanted to note is that for the people who are actually doing the microdosing, like I recently did like a little bit of a rabbit hole on the microdosing subreddit, And they're not looking for subperceptual. Like, they are expecting to be able to feel it, but for it to be non-impairing, for it to be a very functional dose, essentially. Of course, it varies. Different people have different things, but they are looking for something that is noticeable, it seems, generally speaking. So one note on that. Another note is, in terms of the studies on microdosing, there are some that seem to show some benefits for some kinds of things in terms of increased mood relative to placebo, but fairly minor things on that. One thing that has been studied, and that I kind of alluded to having some quibbles with the methodology for how it's studied, is creativity, whether or not it increases creativity. And the ways that we try to study that, try to quantify whether or not someone is more creative than they were yesterday, are things that are very task-oriented, or kind of coming up with a lot of different ideas in a very short period of time, which I think is part of why stimulants are often shown to increase creativity, because that means that we're coming up with more of them in the same amount of time. But basically, I don't think that we have very good research on it right now. And when I was initially looking into it, I was very dubious on microdosing in general, but I'm starting to take a second look at it. And I know it's very popular in what's happening right now.
Yeah, it'd be interesting once you had that look at it. We'd be really interested if you could come back to us, Emily, and let us know what your finds there. Because I'm as lured in as anyone by the promise of it, and I would fully hold my hands up that maybe I've just not done it properly, and if there is, I've taken multiple stabs at it over the years, but if there is a protocol that works, sure, I could do with a pair of eyes. I could do with being better at my job or whatever. But let's switch on to the topic I mentioned around sort of designer drugs, and I think this is something where Josie, you might be able to offer some insights, and I don't know if this ties into the kind of what's happening with your career.
N-bomb.
Yeah, sure. I could talk about it a lot. It seemed like Valentina wanted to say something.
Oh, sorry.
So I don't want to skip over people.
I'm good if we want to change topic, but yeah.
I was curious what you had to say.
Delivers the goods.
I wanted to say that I definitely believe that microdosing is not placebo. I do believe that there are people who have such a high threshold that no amount of microdosing will have an effect, and then they go into sitting. So that is a very individual. I don't know. I feel that that's the way in which the system is structured and the society is structured in those individuals. But it's often very smart and analytical man. And half a joke. I'm Italian, but sometimes the humor comes out that way. But I've had my own experience. In general, I'm really, really sensitive. It took me 5 years to understand I was sensitive, so I went through major overdosing of every possible thing. So also when I tried with microdosing, I did that for a month, and I used the protocol 1 day yes, and then 2 days no. Of course, I started with a lower than average dose the first day. I was not sipping, but everything was very shiny and colorful, and there was a lot of joy. So I reduced, I went much down, and I went to a dose that was basically not perceived. I did not perceive it, but the content that came up in that month, for me and psilocybin have a relationship of deep respect. I don't have the usual joyful psilocybin kind of thing. No, it just shows me things so that I cannot not look at them. So it's a lot of love and gratitude, but also a lot of respect. And that was a very challenging month, and I can tell that there's no placebo effect going on. That was definitely a very perceivable effect, and I'm very grateful for that month. And I do believe that sensitivity plays a major role in whether microdosing works for someone or does not work for someone. So that. Another thing I wanted to add is that, of course, we're talking about psychedelics, but of course, in indigenous traditions, there are other plants that are sacred. Honestly, I microdose on ceremonial cacao, and that's the biggest boost of creativity I've ever experienced from anything. So yeah, that's like there are other things that are not strictly psychedelic that can actually open the heart and connect creativity. Yeah, so I just want to
like deadlines.
I would agree with that. I think the benefits that microdosing gives are probably legitimate, although potentially somewhat exaggerated by placebo. But there are plenty of other compounds that aren't psychedelics that offer the same benefits. For example, I think methylphenidate or ADHD medication will increase productivity and creativity and stuff to just the same extent, if not more, than microdosing a psychedelic, although it might not target depression and things like that quite so directly. Yeah. Rob, what was the question that you asked me previously? I immediately forgot it.
Yeah, we're talking about the sort of the designer drug phenomenon of the being able to, and I actually saw a post from Andrew Gallimore and Hamilton Morris about this today, that there's been some sort of breakthrough or some sort of research done whereby it opens up the possibility for lots of new, like hundreds of thousands of new designer drugs. And I think the kind of topic here is the ability to create psychedelic experiences, but very tailor-made ones, so it's again, coming back to the archaic thing, it's now the ability to put the guardrails on. And again, is this a good thing? And I was just wondering if from your own experience or in your professional career, like, does this something that you come across or that you're working at a company that you work on?
Yeah, I guess the company that I work for, biotech research company, founded by a friend of Alex Shulgin, was co-owned by Anne Shulgin before she passed. We are focusing on literally that. We're trying to correlate subjective effect outcomes with the receptor affinity profile of specific substances by using AI models to tag subjective experience reports en masse with a consistent set of defined subjective effect labels so that we can draw correlations between subjective effect outcomes and minutiae of changes in the brain. And I don't think that sort of thing needs to, replace traditional psychedelics, but I think when it comes to targeting specific therapeutic outcomes, it will probably prove very beneficial. My State Design Labs thinks that, or all the employees think it's kind of a core principle of what we're doing, that the psychedelic experience is essential to the therapeutic outcomes. And then on the other end of the spectrum, there are a number of companies who are trying to engineer the trip out of psychedelics, essentially. So they are trying to create a psychedelic drug that will give you all of these therapeutic benefits without the hallucinations. And while I think that there probably are some amount of neurophysiological benefits, such as increased neuroplasticity and things that would still occur without a subjective psychedelic experience, when it comes to the introspection and the realization and the increased spirituality and things like that, the actual experience itself is inherently tied into having those kinds of outcomes. And while I think it would be good to better target different things, it's ultimately only going to increase the amount of tools we have in the toolbox. It's not going to take away from any pre-existing compounds.
Do you think, though, because I mean, the example that springs to mind is something like when legal highs popped up, or bath salts, or whatever. As soon as those things became the kind of like the mainstream, or became available, that was what the majority of people were doing. And again, people like us become the sort of the fringe here, and it's it's already a fringe to some extent, because not everyone's sort of doing ayahuasca retreats or ketamine retreat or ketamine therapy or whatever. It's just the majority is going to do what's the majority available, and that will be, if suddenly there becomes 100,000 new compounds which are not regulated, and that's what's appearing in the smart shops, that's what people are going to start doing. So I think it will become the mainstream without, the stuff that we're talking about, the DMTs and the psilocybin, that's always going to be there. But the kind of the concern for me is that what people understand is out there is going to be this newer stuff, because that's going to be what's real, and that's what they're going to start understanding as sort of as what, you know, psychedelic experience is. And then we're going to end up in something which I kind of think maps fairly well onto like almost like the social media phenomena, is like, hey, the internet came out, it was all this promise, it was all this like, hey, this is going to get, and now suddenly we just end up with Facebook and this very diluted communication experience. And the same thing I feel could play out very easily within the psychedelic space. Like, hey, we can do anything with all these compounds, we can unchain, and it's just going to end up like bath salts, you know, just
Yeah, so I do understand that concern, but what I am seeing, at least in the United States, is that psychedelics are following a very similar path to cannabis legalization. I didn't necessarily expect it, but the things that are being pushed are natural plant psychedelics. Those are what are being decriminalized, and I think those are what are going to become available eventually through dispensaries or whatever the equivalent is, more so than niche kind of synthetic compounds that induce very specific states. I think that will probably become more common eventually in clinical settings.
I think furthermore, kind of the new bath salts is Delta 8 THC. Go ahead, Gabe.
Cannabis?
I don't think that's I don't know if that's like the perfect analogy. With the whole like legal high thing, I think that the core of that issue right there is availability, like you said. And so I think that having, well, kind of like what Josie said about like these new compounds coming to fruition isn't going to necessarily take away from the old ones. I do see your concern about like the overall space sort of like becoming diluted. But yeah, and then the Delta 8 sort of analogy there, I don't necessarily agree with that because of the simple fact of like the safety profile of something like Delta 8 compared to like spice or bath salts or something. And I understand the whole sort of like game that's played of like, you know, finding these different isomers and finding the loopholes and existing within that gray area. And that's a big part of my issue with the war on drugs. And like, you can point to that and say, look, this is what happens when you do this. Like, human beings are going to find a way regardless, or they're just going to like go to the black market. But something like Delta 8, HHC, a lot of these other, I think they call them like phytocannabinoids, they don't seem to be dropping people dead. I'm not saying that there's not any issues with them, but you know, that is a way in which people are getting access to cannabis. Like, for instance, I live in the state of Kentucky. Cannabis is still illegal here, but I can go literally 2 minutes down the road to a gas station and get, you know, Delta 8. I can get THCA.
Yeah, like I was
kind
just
of what
trying
Rob
to
was
say.
talking about.
Yeah, like I was trying to say that it's something where it is something that people can get more easily. I mean, the appeal of bath salts was not that people drop dead. It was that it was available.
Right, but that was the issue.
So I guess just to play into Rob's analogy, Delta 8 has less of the full subjective effect profile as THC, which for me is something I like because it's less anxiety inducing. And it's more available, so you're doing it more than the original thing that is more well known. So I mean, I don't really think it matters though. People are always going to grow mushrooms, people are always going to grow weed, and I think if niche psychedelics become more available than, say, the traditional plant psychedelics, that will have knock-on effects in the traditional plant psychedelics will be more available than they were previously because now they are decriminalized, now they're less socially taboo. So overall, I think it would be an improvement, even if it's not perfect, which it certainly won't be.
I went to
quick question. Do you know, is there any kind of like research being done to really sort of like discover or unlock the new absolute shit hot, like super mind blowing site rather than sort of like closing the experience down? Is there something that it's going to like trying to be like the, you know, the 2.0 equivalent of like DMT where everyone's just jaw hits the floor of, or is it all the research around just like, again, putting the guardrails on?
Galactic Gargle Blaster.
Yeah, it's definitely not. It's at least in the spaces that I'm working on. There's a lot of people trying to put the guardrails on, but there are studies using the Mystical Experience Questionnaire 30, which is a well-established psychometric scale for measuring mystical experiences, and it shows that the the more a person describes their experience as spiritual or mystical, the greater the therapeutic and positive outcomes in terms of their psychological state. Like that's been shown in studies. So at least at Mindstate, we are trying to think, how can we induce things like crazy beneficial mystical experiences more consistently, not less consistently? And there's a lot of people taking different angles, and ultimately I think they will all just add tools to the toolbox, which is a good thing.
Mm-hmm. Okay. There was a question that I wanted to put to Dakota. Dakota Reverse was supposed to be with us tonight, but he unfortunately couldn't make it. But I'll just float it out in general, because I think it's an interesting point, because obviously Dakota's specialization and background is in really just traveling amongst all these different cultures that he's spent time with, and just all over India, all over South America. He's from cannibals and all sorts of stuff. And I think the question I wanted to sort of put out to me is that these are cultures where they do have this very spiritual, sort of like very simple sort of, people have very simple way of life, and sort of really stripped down all the materialism kind of goes away. And I was just, again, to linking back to my earlier point, I was wondering if we can sort of look at those kind of cultures and think, okay, these guys clearly have some kind of finger on the pulse of what is spiritual, and we kind of recognize that there is something lacking in our own spiritual, and that we want more of that. I think this is the whole thing with us. We want the best of both worlds. We want the spiritual, but we want the material and that sort of thing. But if we can recognize that those guys are nailing it in terms of the spiritual side of things, then are we distancing ourselves further from that? Like, does this not point to things like, just because we could do these things, should we? Because if we want more connection, we want more spirituality, or more of whatever it is that these guys have got, then are we not, again, is this not a sort of a misfire? And I'd like to put that one to Vivec, because I feel like I wanted a sort of solid injection of woo in here, mate. So
go on, let's get it out. It's interesting you say that, because a lot of what we've talked about, the psychedelic renaissance, has not exclusively but mainly been applicable to Western culture. And it's interesting you brought it up, because I was just thinking about it the whole time, about how it'd actually be really interesting to maybe, I don't know who they are, but if there's any content creators, any people who are involved in this space who are from the East, and get them in here one day. And that's what's interesting about Dakota, and I love his content, because he's highlighting the distinction between Eastern and Western culture. As we know, as time has gone on, well, time forever, there is a massive division between East and West, and we're really starting to see this now very blatantly. But it'd be really fascinating to actually ask someone who's involved in these Eastern traditions that utilize these chemicals, and what's their opinion on our trajectory in the West. And like you say, should we put a lid on some elements of it? Because I think sometimes in the West we've got this sort of like libertarian attitude, sort of like a bit like toxic liberalism, in a sense, where it's like, right, if we can do it, let's just do it and just roll with the consequences. In the East, there's a lot more discipline regarding this sort of stuff. And it does feel like they have, whether you're a spiritual person or not, this is clearly something that's influenced human history and influences individual people. And in the East, it's a lot more prevalent that people are just generally less atheistic. And regardless of my own opinions on God, reality, consciousness, whatever, there does seem to be a disconnect in our culture. I mean, it's not a lie to say that we're generally more materialistic than most Eastern cultures. And I think that's why a lot of people, young people and people growing up in this sphere that are understanding all this stuff about psychedelics and the culture surrounding it, I feel like that's why there's a massive gravitation for people learning about this to get involved and seek out these experiences that people in the East it's just like waking up and having a cup of tea, like taking some fucking bufo or something. But over here, it's new and it's exciting, and it's sort of, in a way, in a beautiful sense, it could sort of connect both sides of the planet.
Yeah, I'll come to you in a second, Dan. But I just wanted to throw in here on like sort of Dakota's behalf. It's well worth going checking out on his channel. He's got a video of him giving 5-MeO DMT to an Indian like guru type, and it's very. I think one of the ways that this video is kind of framed is like this. What's it called? Oh, God, the name escapes me. Richard Alpert, the
Ramdas.
Was his Ramdas, yeah. The guy, and he reckons he gave sort of like some Buddhist master some LSD and it just didn't touch the sides or something like, you know, it didn't affect him. I think that's complete bullshit.
I do as well.
And and so Dakota sort of did a similar thing of giving somebody in an Indian guru who's like claims to be like a master of consciousness kind of thing, gave him 5-MeO DMT, and it certainly had an effect on him. I mean, it's clear from the video this has a very powerful. This guy goes feral. But it's still very different to the certainly the effect that 5-MeO DMT has on me. This guy seemed a lot more in control of it, and it was he was sort of channeling it a different way. So I think there is something interesting there about the kind of the spiritual psychological technology that this guy's kind of worked on through living this very simple life, and that'd be there's something there. But I think this idea that you can just sort of meditate yourself immune from 5-MeO DMT clearly was not the case.
No.
But anyway, go ahead, Danny.
So to me, it's helpful to look at it through the lens of content versus non-attachment. Non-attachment would be more like the Eastern way, and content would be more the Western way. I don't know if you're familiar with any of the specific data in Richie Davidson's studies, but they're very robust. I think there's over like 500 publications at this point. And the data is pretty clear when you talk about people who are actually good at mindfulness. He saw very concretely that the way they went about it is they basically prepped people psychologically. They tested them. They wanted to see what makes them tick, blah, blah, blah. And then they showed them, let's say, very disturbing pictures. And these disturbing pictures in a regular person, you would see everything from the visual cortex lighting up to the whole process that the way it's supposed to happen. And then it goes almost like into like a loop, into like an echo, where the person just reiterating whatever regions of the brain, and it just amplifies itself like crazy, versus a very seasoned mindfulness practitioners where they literally go through the same first cycle, visual cortex, all of that, and then it just dies out. So the data is pretty, and this is measured by functional MRI. And so I guess to me it would be a matter of degree and the individual. I can totally imagine how a person who's really, really good at knowing how to reduce the DMN, his own DM or her own DMN's function, can remain almost like detached from the experience. But yeah, I agree with you. When you're talking about things like 5-MeO, you would need somebody who's really good at it. So that would be the difference for me. The content versus just one quick thing. I think that applied to our conversation, I think that's actually a really important distinction. That more content sometimes is good to understand certain things, but the Eastern tradition would tell you that moving forward, you also want to be able to step back entirely, because ultimately the whole Buddhist pursuit is to detach from existence, and there's a balance there.
Go ahead, Val.
I'd like to point out that, mindfulness is a very good thing, but like there are some people that use mindfulness in the sense of creating this really strong part of the psyche that is capable of pushing everything away that is not wanted or appreciated, or that could create any kind of turmoil. And like this part of the psyche can be extremely powerful and can be extremely repressing of anything else in the system that is actually present, and can be so strong that can block any kind of psychedelic experience. And like I saw that happening. The thing is that mindfulness can both bring to enlightenment in a certain way, and a lot of wisdom, but it can also bring to a system and a psyche that is extremely rigid and extremely egoic and extremely managerial, like internally. So it can go either way. So to me, when we talk about this, it's not clear, right? Like, what kind of person is that? Is the person that created a persona that is actually extremely detached from the core, from the self, because everything is meticulously and neatly managed in a very rigid way. It can block whatever experience, or is this a person that has already touched those places through meditation, has already had mystic experiences, and therefore is not somehow impacted anymore because it already knows the space very well. So which one is it?
Yeah, I would I would agree that, and it certainly maps onto my own experiences of sort of being on a retreat or something like that. And what I normally find is that if I'm done like a 1 week or 2 week ayahuasca retreat, it's usually around the third instance of doing something, because then I'm more in that mindset. Whereas the first couple of days, anything can sort of happen, and sometimes nothing happens. But then by the time you kind of settled in and you're more just adjusted to the set and setting, and you're more adjusted to the experience itself, that's when it feels like I'm getting like the maximum benefit, or maybe I'm just indoctrinated into it at that point. So, well, who knows? But that's where it feels like it was. Yeah, like with any sort of psyche, like sometimes anything happens on the first couple of goes.
If I can just quickly respond to Valentina. So, at least according to, if we're looking at data of, again, over 500 publications, actually the answer there is pretty clear cut. So they could so to give you an example, they could actually make a distinction of who's objectively a better meditator. And sometimes there will be these embarrassing cases of people who've been doing it for 40 years. And when they came to the study, they're like, actually, they're not that good. Like, they actually don't know how to do the thing. So I agree with you that it can be like a degree of delusion. But in the practice itself, it's not pushing away. And I know it's probably just a matter of figure of speech, but it's important because it's not pushing away, because what you practice is not pushing away or pulling. You literally detach. And yes, you can have the diluted cases, but when you bring like actual measurements to the picture, it's a little easier to see who's deluding himself that they can do it and who can actually do it. And I think that overall, it's a good thing if you don't make it into, the cure for all. I think that is never a good idea to like say, okay, this one thing cures everything. I don't think it's a good idea, but I definitely think that mindfulness particularly, it's a good baseline if you're good at it, if you actually know how to do it.
I think what we need to do is like fold in, when you have these people who go on these like Tibetan retreats and stuff like that, and they study under some sort of like meditation grandmaster, like the final test is like they step through whatever into the final stage of their life, should have like an MRI machine and like wire them up with like, okay, this is, now we got to find it if you're actually full of shit, have you been paying attention or not? And anyway, on that note, I think this would be probably a good, since we're kind of coming up to 2 hour mark, it'd be a good place for us to sort of to wrap this up. And I just wanted to say, thank you to all you guys. We had some really interesting sort of angles thrown into it. I don't know if we came anywhere close to solving the problem of psychedelic renaissance 2.0, but we had a very enjoyable conversation along the way. Day. I know, man. I know. It's the same with all of it. It's all about the friends you make along the way.
Lad.
But it's
anime.
It's just as a I'll open the sort of the floor for if anyone sort of a closing comment, feel free.
I've got a closing.
Josie, you're muted. Press the mute button, Josie.
I was just saying I want to hit Emily's point because she had her hand raised.
In terms of the when it comes to meditation relative to psychedelics, something that I found very interesting and something we haven't actually brought up yet is that some people are not suitable for psychedelics, particularly if someone has schizophrenia or schizophrenia in their family. It can trigger some very, very negative mental states. And what I learned, I think just like a year or so ago, is that meditation can actually do the same thing. Yeah. Like there are people who get very into meditation and can also have get into some very, very negative states as a result. And those are things that I think we should be very open about when it comes to this space and moving it into the future and trying to better more people's lives with it.
The Dark Side of Dharma is a book I highly recommend by Anna. I can never pronounce her last name, but I think it's the only one with that title. She talks about exactly that.
Sounds like a bit of me, that.
I guess.
I was just gonna. Oh no, go on, Gabe, go.
I guess.
Well, this is the problem. I don't have a webcam. Fuck's sake.
I guess for my closing remarks, all I wanted to say is that, like Rob said, like we didn't figure this shit out. I didn't think we were going to. I thought it was going to be a fun conversation. It's obvious that we live in a very exciting, crazy sort of time to live, and I'm excited to see how this psychedelic renaissance 2.0 sort of merges with AI and the aliens. That's it.
That'll be the well. Let's make that the topic for next time. We're always going to keep coming back to aliens. It's always about the aliens.
Yes, boys.
Go on, Vivec. Do you want to say something, mate?
Just was going to talk about. I give the Yankee Doodles a lot of shit. Obviously, it's all just a joke. But I tell you what, big ups to you lot over the pond and Canada as well, because you are trumping us over here in the dystopian hellscape that is the United Kingdom. We are making barely any steps towards legalization. The only thing we're doing is like some guy in Parliament says, "Oh well, them shrooms are doing some good things, aren't they?" And some guy's like, "No, shut," and nothing's being done about it at all. And fair play, whatever. You can give America all the shit you want, that it's corrupt or whatever, but at least in individual states there's actually been movements being made, and the UK is sorely behind that. We're not making any further steps with cannabis at all, and it just unfortunately feels like we're a very long way off. So if you want to get on psychedelic, fucking get a one-way ticket to Colorado apparently.
Yeah, well, I think we should all head over there and we'll do our own retreats.
Yeah.
We'll head over. We'll stay at Josie's house and we'll all get shit faced on ketamine.
The Americans came up with the laser. Make money.
I came up with the laser idea in Colorado, by the way. So hey,
it's the place to be, isn't it?
Yeah.
I mean, well, that's where South Park is, isn't it? I guess.
Val, any closing comments?
That was just lovely hearing all your opinions and point of views. It was really interesting, so thank you.
Yeah, well, thanks to all you guys. Sorry, go ahead, Josie.
Yeah, I was just going to say, over the last couple of years, I've kind of become this weird bridge between investment, capitalism, psychedelic research, and the online psychonaut community, and I've ended up in quite a few situations where I have gone to conferences and met investors and met corporate types, and while there are a lot of people in it that clearly just want to make money, the majority of the people I make, even that are involved in the corporate capitalist research side, are genuinely very passionate about psychedelics. Like they've tried it themselves, they really believe in it, and I'm not a fan of capitalism, if I'm being honest, but most of the people involved in the psychedelic research space that I have met, even the corporate stuff, they are sincere and they seem to have good intentions, although money is an ulterior motive.
Yeah, I would actually mirror that, and it's certainly some of my experience from some of the retreats and stuff that I've been on, particularly when the pandemic hit. I saw some just, people donating huge amounts of money to keep, retreats up and running, to fund new retreats, and it was done with, I wouldn't even call it investment. It was just gifts, basically. So I think there is some really, really good people, and we talked about the sort of the path to hell being paved with good intentions. I think, there is some of that. I think some of it is just happening through carelessness, but I do think the good intentions. I think there is a lot of genuine stuff. Of course, there's also going to be a lot of bazooka bars and DMT vape pens and shit being sold and stuff like that. But I think overall, I would say my optimism is fairly high that people are doing the right thing. Whether that actually plays out into, I think there's a lot of ways to fuck this up. I'll put it that way.
I just wanted to say thank you for the opportunity of being part of the panel. It was really a lot of fun, and I love bouncing these ideas around. And you don't always find yourself in the company of such knowledgeable people on this subject. So thank you so much. It was a lot of fun.
Well, I mean, I think it's been great to have you all here, and if you're all up for it again, then we could probably carry on with this subject, or veer off down a million tangents. So, let's stay in touch, and it's always going to be aliens, and
yes, please.
And then, let's talk some more about it in future. If you guys go, well, I'll be in touch. But on that note, I will say thank you all so much for your time and for your wisdom and for just the awesome fun. I really enjoyed talking to you all. And let's speak again soon.
Thanks for having us, Rob. It was a blast.
Thanks, everyone.
Thanks, Rob.